Hello and good morning to this morning's session with Gate One, looking at product leadership. The focus of today's session is to help us understand the evolving skill set needed to deliver for your customers. And we're looking at product leadership as a new and evolving area in that debate. Clearly, there are many big macro factors that are driving the evolution of product leadership, and we want to try and unpack some of those issues today. I'm delighted to be chairing this session. Cicero is one of the UK's leading corporate communications agencies. We're part of the Havas network alongside Gate One, which we're both very proud of. And as part of that, as part of our role as a corporate communications agency, we were commissioned by Gate One earlier this year to undertake a piece of research looking at these themes. And today's session is very much hoping to unpack some of that research, some of those research findings, and also to give people the opportunity to debate and discuss. And I would point all of our audience today to the chat function and encourage you all to ask questions as we go along. We want this to be a lively debate. And I know it's very hot outside, so we'll try and keep the debate cool as we go along. Now, in terms of what we're looking to achieve today, essentially we're looking at what product leadership is, what the barriers are, what skills people require in order to make that happen and to overcome those barriers, and how people acquire those skills in what is a very tight job market. So in order to get through that, we've got a couple of people joining me today. I'm delighted to have Andy Wigan with us, who is the VP of Product Management at Go Cardless, who describe themselves as the global electronic payments network. Andy has had a long career in this world, having spent much of his early career at Spotify. I've also got David Ford with me, Client Director at Gate One. David's been with Gate One for 3 years, where he's been working to help clients with their own customer experience journeys. And he's going to be talking us through some of the research findings in a second. I should just add, we were also hoping to have with us another panelist this morning, Carla Harding, who works in a product leadership role at Tesco, but unfortunately she's unwell this morning, so we'd all like to wish Carla a speedy recovery. Now, with the introductions taken care of, at this stage I'd like to hand over to David Ford, who's going to talk us through some of the research findings. David.
Brilliant, thanks Mark, and good morning everyone. As Mark said, thank you for those who've made it on a very already hot and sticky morning. So I'll try not to do my best not to melt over the next 30 to 40 minutes. But as Mark said, we just want to kick off with a bit of sense of when we started out on undertaking this research, and we were thinking about product leadership. We wanted to get a better sense of what did it mean to us, because it still seems quite a relatively new concept, or fundamentally a lot of different perceptions across clients about what it actually means. So we want to get better definition, and I think where we got to with it in terms of both the research that we've done and our early thinking was it needed to encompass three core parts. One was ensuring it's taking a longer term perspective. It's not the here and now, it's not optimizing existing products and services. How do you think longer term? How do you own that vision of not just current state product, but where it's headed? The next part of it is being market led, very much outside in, and also heavily predicated on customer insight, what it means to them, what's important to them. And then organizationally, it involved a real shift in ways of working to be cross-functional, thinking end-to-end across a customer's experience, and in order to deliver a great experience for them. And essentially, it's really thinking about how you align the whole business around a more product/customer-centric way of delivering services to clients. So it's not just about designing to meet customers' needs, but it's also about how do you set up yourselves organizationally to help facilitating that process. And I think one of the things we'll come on to when we get into the research is the interesting challenges that we're seeing clients face and some of the respondents face in tackling all those different factors and elements. So to help better understand this, from a methodology perspective, we partnered with Cicero, as Mark said, and we've done a survey with 50 business leaders across the UK to interrogate that, what people define product leadership to be, where they think the barriers to embedding it, but actually when it's done well, what the impact is, both in the market and in terms of how you work organisationally. So in doing that, we engage predominantly across the C-suite or fully across the suite to get a better understanding of people's thoughts and perspectives. And also we work predominantly with larger organisations. And the reason that we did that was we wanted to get a sense where businesses are more complex, where they maybe have more legacy, whether that's cultural, process or technology challenges, what that means and where their opportunities are to do things differently. And the report itself, from a findings perspective, is aligned into 4 core themes, which we're going to explore today as part of the discussion with Andy and Mark and the people in the room if they've got any questions to ask. Just to note the report itself, we will share in more detail afterwards. So we'll share some of the stats today that'll be much more in that when it's shared post the session today. But the first part of that is around the emergence of product leadership, how it's become much more prevalent, and the role of the product owner and how that's changing and evolving, both in terminology, both in remit, both in ways of working and doing things, what the skills and attributes of product leaders are, what businesses are seeing is really important for product leaders to be successful and embedded across organizations, where there's barriers to making that successful, and then what to think about if you want to embed product leadership effectively within your organization going forward. So we'll scratch the surface of these topics today, and I'll hand back to Mark to get us into it.
Excellent, thank you, David. Kicking off with one of the key issues, because clearly there's the number of key themes we want to get through this morning, but kicking off with the first issue is the emergence of product leadership as a concept. And just to give you a few thoughts, this slide is a bit of a teaser, just giving you a thought on one of the key findings. And essentially, if you take those, if you take the pink and the red bar together, it gives us about 87% of organizations that are already on that journey. But we can see that for over half of them, they're still at an early stage in terms of working through what that strategy looks like. They've appointed a product leader, but they're still working through what it means in terms of the practical issues and the implementation of it. And we find that, broadly speaking, there's very few firms that have really nailed this issue operationally. And Andy, if you want to give us your sort of practitioner's perspective in terms of why you think most companies are still at a relatively early stage in this product leadership journey, what is it that's holding us back?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really tough question to kind of get completely to the bottom of, but my sense on this is that, I mean, companies historically, are successful because they have domain experts in their leadership team, and they rely sort of very heavily on that domain expertise. You found a business or you start a business, because you know something about something, you have an insight and you sort of build off that. And so, direction is set based off of that kind of expertise. Most of the main decisions are based off your knowledge in the space. So I think that's one big factor. And I think just zooming out, if I think about sort of product management as what, what's central to product leadership, I think there's kind of just it's a new skill set, really. Like it's not something, that you can get a degree in or kind of go through a huge amount of formal learning. And, that's an evolving space, obviously. So I think there's kind of just a general lack of understanding and awareness of the power of kind of being product centric and product led as an organization. And depending on, the industry, or I guess the tenure of the existing leadership team in large businesses, it's unproven to them. They've seen other models work quite well. So I think that's probably the main sort of broad factor. And it takes time to bed in as well, as you've said, like to get to a place where, you've hired your product leader, they built a strong team around them, and you've started to embed that kind of more product centric culture in an organization. That takes time to bed in and actually prove that it works, as well as other ways of operating. So yeah, but I'm sure there's a lot in there.
And who fuels that conversation internally? Is Is the value of product leadership something that's emerging out of the existing product team, or is it something that's coming top down from the C-suite? Who's actually fueling that conversation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's different for different organizations. I can only speak for organizations where I've worked, and I've been personally lucky enough, or I suppose I've actively sought out organizations that want to kind of go after that. So I can only speak for that. So a lot of it comes from the CEO, comes from, you know, them seeing other companies work in a more product-led, product-centric way. I mean, if you take a company like Spotify, where I spent a bunch of my career, you know, people look to Spotify for kind of how it can be done well and want to emulate that. And so, you know, and a CEO will see that and sort of want to bring product leadership in. So I think a lot of it stems from kind of, you know, from the outside, seeing how companies are operating in that way and wanting to bring it in-house.
And David, from your perspective, because clearly you're working with a lot of different organizations in different sectors, are there any common themes that you see as a consultant in terms of where that impetus is coming from and what's driving that?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to your point, Andy, around, you know, you, I suppose, been at clients will seek out organisations that are at a level of maturity and appetite to work in this phase. And I think what we found is, you know, we will always work with clients, I would say, with different levels of maturity in products, you know, in terms of delivering change. And I think some of the biggest things we found that there is a whole leadership piece in terms of level of, I would put it as kind of education, understanding versus buy-in, but understanding what product really is, why it's important, and why we should do things differently. I think particularly in the last, you know, 3 to 5 years, there's been a big groundswell. It's a bit kind of, you know, you come out of people putting digital in front of every word and that being the new thing, to products starting to be something similar. And I think a lot of what has happened in, to my experience, has been is that clients have seen their competitors in the market setting up products as a way in which to deliver change, but in doing that haven't fundamentally addressed, for it to be successful, you need to think differently about how you're organized, how you prioritize, how you make decisions, how you support people for the right level of training and skills in order to be able to do that successfully. So I think there's definitely the appetite from clients to do that. Where I've seen it be less successful or not drive the change you'd hope it would, is some of it is just around that education, understanding of how it sets it up, what's important for it, but also clients aren't then not necessarily taking the next steps, which is you have to think about your ways of working, how you're organized for that to be more successful and endemic across the business.
I'm interested to discuss with both of you why this is emerging now. And I mentioned in the introduction, there's clearly a lot of big macro issues that are hitting businesses. For the last 15, 20 years or so, we've had digitization. In the last 10 years, the growth of sustainability and ESG. In the last 2 years, 3 years, obviously we can throw the pandemic into the mix. Given what product leadership is and what it involves and how it ties the business together, can businesses address these strategic issues without having some kind of product leadership function within their business making that happen? I'll probably put that to Andy first.
Well, obviously I'm biased, and I don't think I think you can adopt some of these practices, but yeah, I haven't thought a great deal about this. I suppose the emergence or the availability of information. So if you think about sort of, you know, being product led and being product centric as kind of like a mix of art and science, but a lot of it is kind of science based, where, you know, you're taking a huge amount of information from inside the company, from outside the company, and you're synthesizing it and you're trying to make decisions and trade-offs based off of that. And I think there's a couple of things which have obviously changed. I don't necessarily, well, perhaps in the last 5 years, but certainly in the last sort of 10, 15 years, where, you know, there's a lot more information available in order to make decisions. So you don't necessarily need to rely on that domain expertise anymore and that kind of legacy domain expertise. And then I think the ability to synthesize that through really, like, you know, good tooling and I guess process as well, but there's lots more tools available, you know, to both bring that information in and process it and synthesize it. So I think there may be a couple of reasons. Yeah, I'll keep scratching my head on that. I'll pass over to David to try and fill some more in there.
Yeah, I think in terms of there's always different ways in which to drive your profit growth, better experiences, etc. But as a way in which of delivering change, I think it's really important and prevalent that product leadership is a way in which of successfully doing that at scale. If I think even back, let's start about 5 years ago about product, it was very much, and some areas still is, some areas it may have been more mature, but it's moved from being part of an IT function to drive new features, functionality, optimizing technology, to kind of the business critical capability to go outside in and look at the market and understand what needs to change. And I think that's critical, if the not most important thing. I think we've at a macro level moved from being a society who wants the best possible experience and best possible service, and I think without having product leaders who understand who their customer is, what's important, what's the market doing, noting that expectations of experience and service aren't just being set by the sector that you operate within, they're being set by competitors directly and indirectly across the market. So that role is really, really critical. And I think the role of product and customer, how those things come together is really, really important, because going forward, the role of product isn't just to optimize and enhance, it's to look at 2-3 years ahead what is happening, what will our customers be wanting, where are their new threats, etc. coming in, and to ensure that you remain relevant, that you remain credible, that you continue to grow and progress. I think product leadership is really critical, but also organizations acknowledging how the role is evolving and what it's going to mean, not only in 12 months time, but 3 to 5 years time is really, really important. So that you continue to stay at least at pace, if not ahead of your competitors, and understand how your customer base is going to change, and therefore what services and features and enhancements, functionality you're going to need to provide to be able to respond to that.
And David, you mentioned it's important to know who your customer is, and obviously in terms of product leadership, not all of your customers are going to be external. There's a lot of important internal stakeholders who you're potentially servicing. Andy, I'm keen to understand, how important is that internal audience? When I was speaking to Carla at Tesco a few weeks ago, she was mentioning how it's those enabling functions, the finance, the payroll, the HR, being able to adapt to all of that helps you then serve the end customer is absolutely critical in this journey. How important is that from your perspective at Go Cardless?
It's hugely important. So I just had a thought on the last question, just in terms of the emergence of product leadership now. And I think there's lots of business models that are emerging as well that are different, like product-led growth type models, which I don't know if it's chicken or egg, but they obviously drive the need for stronger product leadership, because you're using you're putting the product at the center of the growth of the business, like take Netflix or Spotify, or businesses that essentially have that kind of freemium funnel. So anyway, wanted to make sure I got that one in. In terms of internal product, we have an internal product function at Go Cardless, and we're serving kind of pretty much everybody across the business, I would say, from kind of the sales org all the way through to finance and the marketing organizations, risk as well. Couple of things on this then. So they're harder jobs. I would say, that the people that we have in those teams have their customers in the room every single day, bashing their heads, and so it kind of makes the job of managing their expectations and making sure that you're keeping them reasonably happy harder. But it's what drives kind of a lot of the efficiencies in the business, So to David's point, they're kind of enabling functions, and we think about our internal product teams as basically an actual differentiator for the business. If our internal product teams can can provide their stakeholders internally with like the right tools and internal products, whether we've built them, whether we've bought them or integrated them. If they can do that in an effective way, they can speed teams up, or they can make teams faster than other businesses who are trying to do similar things. So we sort of look at it as an actual key differentiator for being able to build our business quicker.
And that kind of takes us neatly onto our second section of the discussion today, looking at the skills and attributes of product leadership. What is it you actually need? And Andy, you mentioned there for the internal product leaders, the notion of being in the room with head of finance, the CRO, or whoever else having their head bashed daily. We asked people what they thought a good product leader should have in terms of their skill set, and it's clear that a number of things came out as key issues, particularly the ability to influence and inspire others. You clearly have to have some kind of communication skill set, the ability to sell ideas across different business groups within the business, the ability to achieve transformational business outcomes, so to operationalize these strategic issues over 3, 4, 5 years, as David was mentioning, it is a long-term play. And combining that with a technical product, the ability to understand the product knowledge, the ability to understand the digital aspects of delivery. It's quite a broad order, isn't it? A broad range of skills. First question I would ask, Andrew, as someone in this field, do you recognize that skill set, and are there any particular skills we've missed?
Yeah, I mean, those are certainly sort of 3 of the very important areas. When I think about sort of building my team, I think about sort of skills and traits, and we don't over-index too much on the technical stuff, I have to say. I think we're lucky in that if you hire in people who are sort of deep thinkers and who are highly analytical, they generally tend to have a bunch of technical skills anyway that kind of come with that. So we don't over optimize for that initially, but it's obviously hugely valuable. And then I think on the traits side of things, we like to make sure we hire people who have high agency. And by that, I mean, they can take ownership of things, they can make decisions quickly, but you have to balance that with not coming across as arrogant, because I think there's kind of like the arrogance of the product managers has been an issue for some time for many organizations. That's why I think it struggles to bed in some places. So I think there's the agency, but also just resilience. I talked about bashing heads, obviously not physically, but the thing we talk about at GoCardless is that to be successful as a product manager, you will be making, probably 20% of your stakeholders grumpy every day, and it's a different 20% each day. So you kind of across the week, you've made everyone grumpy a little bit. If you haven't done that, then you haven't done your job properly. So it's having that resilience to sort of, be able to make people grumpy, but then still kind of be able to sit in a room with them and hold good conversation. So that's the reality of it, and if you can make a decision which impacts them negatively without making them grumpy, then, well, you can come and join my team, because I think that's one of the highest, most important skills you can have, traits you can have even.
And how do you go to market and find the people with the right building blocks? As you mentioned, it's a relatively new area. It's not somewhere where you can come off the university production line with a degree and you're ready to go. How do you actually identify who those people are?
I think there's enough understanding of, again, I'm talking specifically about product management here, but I think there's enough understanding now of product management for, job ads around product management to make sense to a broad enough audience. I don't think you're kind of like fishing in the dark. We look we look at all sorts of backgrounds. You know, we've got ex-consultants in the team, we've got ex-scientists, PhDs, you know, PhD graduates, we've got ex-marketeers. So there's no kind of one single pool of talent that we look to. Yeah, I mean, it's you know, we have a very stringent sort of hiring process in terms of making sure we're getting, you know, the right traits and skills in. We go through a multi-stage process. We like to see people in action. You know, I think, you know, we do a fairly extended kind of case study, and that's really the heaviest weighted portion of the interview process. So we have people do some proper product work as part of the process, and actually it's quite enjoyable as well. So yeah, it's, you know, it's very thorough, I think is the takeaway.
And you mentioned you've got former consultants on your team. Obviously, in David, we've got a current consultant on the team. David, when clients are coming to you looking for solutions, what are the common skills gaps that you see client side, and what is it you're being asked to fill?
Yeah, and it's interesting because when you know, there's the product 101, you've got that Venn diagram, which is technology, business, customer, and the product owner in the middle. And I think, you know, that still remains true. You need to understand technology, you need to understand who your customer is, and of course you need to understand the business and consider as go in it. But I think building on a lot of what Andy was saying, more and more we're finding that we have more data than we could ever kind of wish to imagine. But we always typically find with clients that sometimes they have the data, but they don't know what it means, or to drive insight from it to drive decision making. And one of the big shifts we're seeing is being data-led in decision making. But on top of that is having the right behaviors and skill sets around being able to take people with you on something that may feel as a bit ambiguous or a bit uncertain. And I think a lot of the role of product now is to try and create certainty where there's uncertainty, particularly if you want to get ahead and move forward in the marketplace. So a lot of the skills are, we feel, you know, the hygiene factors are that you know the tech really well, that you understand your customer and you understand the business. But what we're seeing is the more leadership skills that are becoming more prevalent are how you manage difficult conversations, to your point, Andy, how you navigate stakeholders where they may be a bit frustrated or, you know, grumpy around what you've said, but you do it in a way in which that starts to bring them on sides. And the importance of data in that process is really, really critical. How to get multiple data sources, some of really strong quality, some of, you know, questionable or would need sort of more work around it, to create a narrative and a story to kind of influence people to move forward. And I think when we looked at some of the traits about what's important, influencing critically, but some of the skills, you know, being a really strong communicator was one of the strongest things people reference from a leadership perspective. So I think in many respects, it's not decoupling product from leadership, but if you assume that to be a good leader, you need to have all the things you'd have, whether you're a CEO or a senior manager. It's just how you entwine it with the product, so you can drive businesses to support them making decisions that possibly make them feel a bit uncomfortable or a bit uncertain, because it might be a path less well trodden and things that they're not less used to in terms of how they've operated previously.
I think I can add to that as well. I think businesses struggle, and we struggle with this as well. It's not a solved problem, where with the different types of bets that you're making, you know, things that are really certain, sure things, which you should just do, like, you know, sometimes called table stakes or whatever, you know, to be competitive in a market. And then things that you've got to do, which are, you know, perhaps longer payback time, way more uncertain. And every product manager loves a good framework. So every time we sort of trying to talk about these types of things, we draw up as many different 4x4s as we can, just to kind of like frame the problem. I think if you can do that, you know, that's half the battle. If you can actually frame kind of like, okay, think about bet types, you know, which quadrant do they go in and why? How can you think about them? You know, then you can kind of get your CFO or, you know, your other senior leaders just to sort of visualize and see how you're thinking about something. Then they can be like, okay, well, maybe, you know, we can have a completely different financial model or different forecasting model for this thing versus this thing, you know, and you start to, and I think the power of good product leadership and good product management is being able to sort of do that framing. And then obviously, you know, to David's point, you bring people on the journey with you as you're kind of explaining it.
Thank you for that. In terms of the barriers to successful product leadership, we were quite keen to understand what internal and external issues might get in the way of you delivering success. So for the third slide, we looked at what those barriers are, and it was clear that one of the big issues was the legacy aspects within the business itself. 40% of our respondents talked about legacy, and I'm quite interested to understand from both your perspectives what are the key issues in terms of legacy? Because clearly, in some businesses, you may be moving from, if it's an older business, from paper-based to digital platforms. In a lot of companies, you're going to be moving from legacy IT estates to new platforms. In terms of the legacy issues, what are the particular challenges businesses face, and how do you effectively overcome those challenges? And I'll put that to Andy first.
Yeah, as I said before, I can only speak for kind of myself and where I've worked, and I've both been lucky and chosen to work in companies who want to be kind of product centric and product led. So I mean, all of those numbers there make sense. I think when it comes to legacy issues, I think I would probably include in that sort of just what I was saying at the beginning around people being sort of maybe stuck in their ways, or wanting to rely on their domain knowledge or their experience, and it's worked well so far doing it like this. Why change? It's like, yeah. I think that's probably not necessarily in companies that don't do product leadership well, but companies that do have that as well. I mean, I can speak for all the companies I've worked in, even though they are sort of more product centric, you still have those barriers there to sort of like mass adoption and people understanding and getting and buying into sort of those methodologies. So but I think, yeah, bit of a cop-out answer, but I think generally, like, people don't like change if they've been successful doing something in a certain way. So that's probably the main one for me.
Beyond those cultural points, David, what do you see in your role as a consultant?
I think what I found interesting from the stats was about a third of people looked at like the product leader skills, which I think is interesting. And if anything, I thought that would have been higher. But some of that for me probably comes down to, again, one was just around that education awareness of what product is, what it's there to do. I think what we found from the report is, pretty much everyone we spoke to is on some kind of level of product journey, but equally there's an inconsistency in what it means and how they think it works and evolves. Where we've worked with clients who are, I would say, less mature in product, what we found a lot of is things like I'm kind of over again to make the point, but on a Friday you'll be a business analyst and on a Monday you'll be a product owner. And actually for the individual, there's what does that mean? How am I operating differently? Is the organization clear about what I'll be doing differently? And as such, what sometimes you find is the same person's got a new job title, but in fact doing what they did historically, and the business is not clear on there for what the change on the back of it is. And I think sometimes there's a bit of assumption that being a really good technical SME will automatically mean you'll be a good product owner. And actually the skills are very, very different. It's moving away from understanding a technology application or a platform to setting a vision, understanding who the customer is, driving change, testing and learning, etc. And I think some of those barriers are around the way in which organizations may be setting client teams up to success, whether that's for internal, customer, external, in order to deliver that. So some of the things around what was interesting was the role of being a visionary, strong communicator were really, really critical, that leaders felt was important to being, a product leader and to driving that change. And I think in this period of the last 3 to 5 years, where we've gone from limited product functions in IT to it now being everyone has a product function, I think that bit in the middle has been lost for some clients about how do you set it up for success. And it's not just about, rebadging a function and then expecting things to be different. There's a much bigger change in cultural piece as well as an organizational piece to make it successful and get up and running.
And question for both of you, how do you effectively change an organization's culture in order to support this transition? Presumably you can't do that without C-suite buy-in. You need the CEO behind this. You need business, the incentives and the financial package to support this. There's a lot of different things that need to be aligned. How can you do that, and what are the ingredients that are absolutely necessary? I'll put that to possibly Andy first.
Yeah, I think you mentioned some key ones there around making sure you've got C-suite buy-in and you've got general support for it being a thing. I mean, it takes time I would imagine, to sort of, bed in something from nothing. You need to focus quite a bit on your hiring processes, making sure that you're bringing in the right types of people, decide who you want, decide how you're going to test for that, and then bring them in. And there's no kind of playbook for that. We've developed our own very bespoke kind of hiring process for product management, and we change it all the time. As product people, we look at that as a product, and so we test it and change it all the time, and we get feedback from candidates and things. So hiring is obviously a huge factor. I think at the very beginning, you basically need, your existing product leader to stand up and explain what the vision is. That's something which I think is really important, whether it's, a 10-year strategy or even just a 3-year kind of plan, that having somebody stand up and talk about that in a customer-centric way, or in a way that's different to how the company's talked about things previously, is really important, and doing that really frequently. Like I think that at Spotify, for example, we just had product leaders continually standing up in front of the whole organization, explaining kind of where we were going, how we were going to win, et cetera, and it was part of the product kind of, that was the product's output, I suppose, to internally very frequently. So I think that's hugely important to do right from the outset. So yeah, so hiring, communication, some pretty generic things there, but I think having some resilience towards it as well. Having any new way of working, or sort of like trying to change a culture and having that adopted, you're gonna hit some barriers. So I think you just have to keep going with it, and trust in the data, trust in the fact that it works in really successful organizations. Evidence that continually, and continue to sort of like try and convince the naysayers about that, using data and sort of using good examples.
Yeah. And I think just to briefly add to that, completely to what you said, Andy, there's a big around the case for change. Why are we doing it? Why is it important? And what are the building blocks to get us there? I think the other thing is to see where you can get quick wins and demonstrate value early. So the importance of testing and learning, setting up teams in a way in which to drive that value is really critical as well. Because for some people, that change will only be enacted or considered it's worthwhile when they see the value out the other side. So consistently iteration on the case for change and the why, as well as being able to demonstrate value early, above and beyond obviously recruitment and everything else, I think is really important to taking people on that journey over time.
And David and Andrew mentioned earlier, if you're not offending everyone in the organization at some point during the week, you're not doing your job properly.
Yeah.
I suspect that's going to be absolutely the case when you're pushing back on culture and getting people to think and behave differently.
Yeah.
Is it easier to have those conversations as an external consultant?
I think so. We'll see how long we'll stay with the client on the back of it. But yes, I think there is that adage that an outside-in perspective, a fresh perspective, is easier to navigate, and sometimes we do find we play that role between different parts of the business and how we navigate those conversations, because we're impartial and we're there to drive what's right. I think also we also live a lot on the adage of we'll do it with kindness, and we'll do it in a way in which will drive to the right outcome. But fundamentally, the other thing I find as well is that you've also got to learn where to be pragmatic. And I think that's really, really important on, I suppose, any type of transformation journey, particularly in product. You know, for all these things, there's the best practice in industry of how these things you'd like them to operate in a greenfield ideal world. When you bring in legacy IT, cultural changes, complex processes, skewed data, what we found a lot is, where do we find the middle thread to get the client close to where they need to get to, but in a pragmatic way that takes the business with them. And that's not always easy. And that still does involve difficult conversations and ways in which you're doing things that aren't right. But typically we find going in with the best practice model doesn't normally get clients where they need to get to. And that pragmatism, which I think is important for product leadership as well, which is, okay, I know I'd like to be here, but for these reasons I can't be, so we'll tweak it, I think is really important as well, because that's all part of the stakeholder conversation, navigations about how do they bring the client with them, and the more they start to drive that value, the more they can push where they want to get to further down the line.
Andrew, do you want to challenge that at all? Is it easier to have those conversations as a consultant, or do you find it easy to dive in there and ask the difficult questions?
I don't find it particularly difficult to ask the difficult questions personally. I wouldn't want to be a consultant though, because coming into organizations fresh, and so you have to get over that barrier of learning the culture and building trust and things, you know. So I think there's pros and cons to both things. As a consultant, obviously you can be super objective, but you do have to tread the line of you know, you're sort of in sales mode, I suppose, you know, 50% of the time trying to keep the client sweet. So I think it starts with sort of having, like we said earlier, having the C-suite sort of accept the need for something new, and that gives you the in, right, to then be able to go and have those conversations.
Yeah, right. The final point we want to pick up on is, how do you actually embed this? How do you make it effective within and across the business? And I think that point of sort of the enterprise-wide application of product leadership is something that comes out, and we can see from this slide here, 69% said that it relied on an end-to-end approach, incorporating product, technology, sales, marketing, and customer servicing. So it's being able to pull everything together within a consistent product leadership strategy, and making sure that product leadership strategy is aligned with the wider corporate strategy. Andrew, is that something you agree with, or do you think there are other more important aspects that need to be part of that mix in order to embed this properly?
I think this is that's a fairly comprehensive list there. I think everything has to start with corporate strategy. So we Go Cardless, we basically have 3 supporting strategies to our corporate strategy. We have the product strategy, the financial strategy, and the sort of GTM strategy. Each of those obviously need to sort of coexist and be aligned, but they are there in service of the kind of corporate or the overall company strategy. So I think everything has to start with that. But, you know, embedding something from scratch is different to embedding something where you may have, like, you know, a couple of product squads here and like maybe a couple of folks in your IT team who want to do something. Like, it's, you know, it depends on your starting point, I think. So very tough question to answer. But I think, you know, repeating what I said before, the key elements are making sure that you've got C-level buy-in. I think making sure that everything kind of stems from the corporate strategy, but the product strategy obviously is going to be feeding that continuously. And then it's about getting on with it, and, like, you know, to David's point, you know, starting small, getting a few quick wins under your belt, you know, hiring some really highly skilled people who've done it elsewhere. That's obviously going to be a big help. So yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack there, but, you know, those are probably 3 of the key things.
David?
Yeah, I think just to build on that, from some of the other kind of stats, when we draw that down further, was 60% of business leaders felt they needed to recruit the right skills. 50-60% felt they need to invest in new capabilities and technology. Over 50% felt they need to invest in internal product training, and almost half felt they need to make changes how their company is organized. And I think what I took from that is similar to Andy's point. It needs to be at a corporate enterprise level. It can't be decoupled from your business strategy. It has to be there to enable the success of the business strategy, and they need to be really, really lined up and aligned. Your recruitment and your learning and development needs to be really critical in terms of who you're bringing into the business, but also it's a challenging market, as I'm sure everyone will be aware. It is hard to get good people at any time, but particularly at the moment. So that how do you invest in the people that you have and give them the right skills and capabilities to help move you forward is going to be really important. And the final thing, which comes back to that stat, is you not to think about it in isolation. It needs to be thought about as an end-to-end. Product isn't simply a function that delivers new features and enhancements. It's, I suppose, the engine of driving, your future customers, your future growth. And I think, there's of course the aligned to corporate strategy, etc. But what I think is really important for businesses to, and I suppose in addition going forward, is to really understand how the role of product is evolving. Because, Andy mentioned earlier about growth-led marketing or product-led growth. We're seeing a lot about the role of marketing becoming more prevalent in product owners. So it's not just about optimizing the product, how do you take it to market, how do you grow it? And as a result, those skills are going to be new and different, and people are going to need to be taken on that. So product's going to be, I suppose, a more scarce resource to get the people that you need. So without the right environment for them to be successful, the right training and the right recruitment aligned to a business strategy, that makes it all a bit more challenging. So a number of things to unpack there, but I think to summate, it's align it to a business strategy, ensure you've got the right learning, development and recruitment to get the right mix of people. Think wider than functions. You've got, I suppose, you think of the customer journey and how customers navigate, what's that mean for a product and how you set up to deliver it. And again, test and learn, trial and error to demonstrate value and understand what works well for you and your teams and how you continue to grow it and scale that over time.
Thank you, David. That's a perfect summation or wrap up of the discussion and the kind of themes that internal product leaders need to be thinking about, and indeed their C-suite if they're embarking on this journey for the first time. And Andrew, is there anything that you think David missed there? Don't be shy. If there is, do say so.
No. I mean, it's
Excellent.
all there in some way, isn't it? Yeah. No. Can't expand on that.
So it is essentially understanding that this is not about product feature enhancements. This is a wider strategy. It has to be applied across the business. It needs the senior management C-suite buy-in, and you need the right culture, training and skills throughout the organization in order to ensure that this is being embedded properly.
Of course, we haven't really talked much about kind of customer centricity at all here, but I think they are very much aligned. If you have a customer centric organization, you're likely to have a more product centric way of working and an organization that supports that, and one's gonna drive the other. So I think the broader cultural change that you need to see is getting that in place. That customer centricity mindset, I think, first of all, is hugely important, but it's not something that you can sort of go through a tick box exercise of doing. That's a much broader transformational project to sort of like ensure that, and the product way of working will help to drive that as well.
Just a final question before we hand off and let everyone get back to their day. Andrew and David, when you're looking around the market, and David, this might be clients you've worked with, Andrew, it might be other brands that you notice, who do you think is making the greatest advancements in embedding product leadership? Who around the market do you actually admire? Who's leading on this?
Yeah, I can go on that one. I mean, one company that I love because I use their product every day. In fact, two we use their products every day. Atlassian. We have a couple of ex-Atlassian folk in my team who are just excellent. Super objective, super data driven, for some reason highly resilient as well. I don't know if that's just the Atlassian journey or just the individual, but and obviously their business model is very much around sort of product-led growth, and they're looking at big vision as well as kind of day-to-day micro optimization. So they do the whole lot, and I love how they, at least seemingly from the outside, how they operate. And then one that we all use regularly at GoCardless is Looker. That's again, like, it's a really fantastic product, kind of came out of nowhere and absolutely smashed the competition, and they have a very product-led growth model as well. So I enjoy those products, and also kind of from the outside how they build those products.
I think the only things I would add to that, one of them, Andy, I suppose you couldn't talk about, she used to work there, but I'm a big user of Spotify, and I think their ability to the simplicity of the streaming, the curation of content, the collaborative playlists, etc., is something that is clearly, product-led, customer-led, insight-driven in order to do that, and the ability for them to make those designs seamlessly. And that's probably what I would, what I'll be listening to when I'm working my head down and work. And in terms of, I suppose day-to-day Slack, how I kind of manage my time and how I'm working with other teams. Interesting story about Slack in terms of they pivoted their product and they use it as an internal tool, and their actual other business area wasn't working as they'd anticipated. But the power of pivoting a product, being customer led, seamlessly easy to work and navigate, are kind of ones that stand out to me. Obviously, you've got your Amazons and everything else, but in terms of day to day, in terms of working, Slack and Spotify, two big ones from my perspective.
And just one final question. In terms of the product leader toolkit, and this might be something that's more appropriate for Andy, I'm sure both of you can have a go. What's actually in that toolkit? How do you actually organize your day? And given that you've got that long-term strategic position that you have to fulfill, but you're also in the weeds on the day-to-day in terms of the implementation, how do you strike that balance between the big picture and the technical in the weeds element?
Yeah, I mean, good question. If I answer that from the perspective of a sort of product manager on the ground, and I think Lewis popped a question in Q&A as well, do you look for leadership qualities? Like, yes, is the answer to that. And I think all product managers are leaders, because most of the org structures that you adopt when you're doing product-centric build are where the product manager is kind of the de facto leader of the team. So that's important. Then to segue into your question, Mark, the setup is very important. Making sure that the structure of the teams is set up for success, and teams need to have clear remits. They need to have clear sort of parts of the surface area of the product that they own and are accountable for. They need to have we ensure that all of our teams, for example, have kind of like mini CEO type vision, mission type things that all of the team have bought into. So it's the setup is, I think, the most important thing with that. What does a product manager do every day? Completely different things depending on the flavor of the product you're working on, or the type of product manager you are. I don't think there's one thing we haven't really said throughout this discussion is like there's no single mold for a product manager. There's many different types and flavors. You've got people who are sort of perhaps more on the analytical edge, people who are perhaps more on the creative edge, and others. So quite spiky profiles as people, and you want to get a really good mix of those. But you need to be able to be disciplined. You need to be able to sort of have your routines. You need to be able to get your daily stand-up done within 10 minutes. Not that's always the PM's role. Sometimes you might have an agile coach or a product owner or someone else running that part of the thing. So routines. I think it's really important to be speaking to your customers as regularly as you can. You need to speak to customers once a day, probably. Regardless of whether you're internal, whether you're or building kind of core products. I think having that as part of your day is hugely important. I do think it's important as well to have you know, a decent amount of thinking and writing time. You know, product managers do produce quite a bit. If you're product managing a single team, you do need to produce quite a lot of things to be able to, you know, share information with your stakeholders, get buy-in and what have you. So you need to be disciplined on that sort of time management element and carving out focus time or writing time. I actually was only a product manager myself for about 5 months. So, and then I went sort of straight into product leadership. So I'm probably a really crappy individual product manager. These are things that I say to my team and I kind of observe them doing.
I think just to build on what Andy said, I think, yeah, you know, that I suppose the staple, the product manager vision, mission statement, core priorities, your customer research, you know, etc. Your roadmap, your backlog, and that consistency. So I think there's a big thing around standardization. So all product owners are having the kind of the same suite and toolkit of things. And I think why that's important, one is around to support product leaders in making decisions, because you're always going to have finite capacity and, you know, I suppose unlimited demand of things coming in, and people working consistently, capturing things a consistent way, having the same technology, whether that's a Slack or a product board or Aha, to capture those insights is really, really important. So then you can look at how you make decisions around it. I think the other thing, taking up a level, is, I think the part of the question was about how do you have big picture, but also be in the day to day. I think it's really important, and, you know, this is a longer sort of thing to go through, but simplistically, you need to be able to link your strategic objectives to what product owners are actually doing. So you can get line of sight of, is what the feature, the change I'm making, fundamentally making a change to the business and where we're headed. And what that does also do is help support prioritization, because a lot of what product owners are doing is constantly prioritizing based on, yeah, that capacity. So I think there is different ways to kind of link up that, you know, again, being pragmatic, not to overcomplicate it, but I think being able to link up and understand what you're doing, driving the bigger picture, and then standardizing how you capture insight, your vision, your backlog, your roadmap is really, really important to help at a leadership level people make decisions about how to best allocate resource to drive where you're getting to, because invariably things will change as new demand comes in.
Thank you for that, David, and thank you both for today's discussion. It has been fascinating and illuminating. There's tons of areas in here that are at their very nascent stage within businesses. So I'm sure this conversation is going to continue and evolve over many years to come. So it's been great speaking to you both this morning. I'd like to thank Andy for his time, not just on the session, but also in helping us with the white paper and the research that we've undertaken to date. And also I'd like to extend that to Carla, who's also been very helpful during this process. David, just one final thing for you. Is there any timeline on when the white paper is coming out that you can share with us today?
That we're just finalising it currently. So after today, any other sort of feedback we'll take and refine it. But within the next week, we'll share that with everyone who's kindly attended today, and then we'll be doing something more widely. In the interim, if anyone's got any questions or any further thoughts and specs we didn't get to today, please just let us know. We're happy to follow up on those. But yeah, please look out for the report in the next week. Thank everyone so much for their time as well today and joining.
Excellent. Thanks both, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks everyone.
Take care. Bye.